Hello everybody, it's Brian O'Hengisa here, nutritionist and coach at Triage Method, and today I'm going to be talking to you about strategies that you can implement when it comes to managing your nutrition around things like social occasions and potentially even unplanned events that you didn't know about ahead of time, but you find yourself, invited out to a meal on a weekday after work and you didn't know it was coming, spontaneous. I'm going to go through all these kind of things to show you what we do with our clients so that you can manage this stuff for yourself and so it doesn't actually derail you when it comes to your overall health, body composition, performance goals, whatever it may be. So what is actually the main issue here? Like, why do we even need to think about dealing with social events, dealing with unplanned events that come up, right? Well, the issue is that they can predispose to people consuming more calories, more energy from food. There's often just more energy available or more calories available in the foods that are at some of these events. And we can also consider that there could be higher intakes of alcohol consumed at some of these events or some of these social occasions. So that obviously contributes to the total energy content or total calorie content of anything like this. And of course, if there's excesses of calories consumed across weeks and months consistently, then that will lead to potentially weight gain over time, fat gain over time, which may not be what you want. Therefore, it is worth looking at these things, looking to have strategies to manage these things because, realistically, our clients all live in the real world, right? They're not just going to give up all their socializing, not going to just turn down invitations to every single event to say, no, I'm focused on, my body composition goals right now. So we need to come up with strategies to actually help people. And that's something we do pride ourselves in here at Triage Method in terms of our coaching. Try and build the coaching strategy and the plan around the individual and their lifestyle, help them manage this stuff. Because, if I say to somebody, yeah, well, we can get you fantastic results in 12 weeks, but, you have to have no social events, nothing like that. It's not going to be realistic, and I don't want to be someone who coaches that either. I want to help people come up with solutions to these problems and come up with strategies so that they actually understand how to manage their nutrition long term, because that's what this is all about. Another potential issue could be actually feelings of shame that might arise after events like these if you feel like how you've acted in terms of the food or the alcohol is just not in line with your goals. So people can feel quite ashamed of, I ate so much at the wedding, or I went out for dinner and drinks and just consumed so many calories. I feel really, really shitty about that because I feel like it's not who I want to be and it takes me away from my goals. And that can actually facilitate, worse behaviors overall. Then you might not feel like looking after your nutrition. You might not feel like going and doing your exercise. And of course, we don't want any of that either. So let's start looking at some of the strategies that we use with people here, okay? So for most social events, you will be able to plan for them in advance to some extent, right? Because it's unlikely that all social events will just pop up out of nowhere and you'll be going about your day and suddenly you find yourself, walking into a wedding or a communion or a barbecue or something like that, right? You'll kind of have advance notice for a lot of these. So something we can do here is try and plan for this, right? So I like to do sort of visualization exercise with a lot of my clients for these types of scenarios. So what that might look like is I want to say to them, okay, think about going to this event and think about how you actually want to act when you're there, right? What kind of food choices do you want to make? What kind of choices do you want to make overall? How do you want to feel as a result afterwards? And then that gives us something that we can actually aim towards, okay, in terms of making choices. So the client is then putting a plan together to say, okay, this is what I'm actually going to do when I go to this event, instead of, which is part of the problem here, so a lot of the time people will just go to an event, they'll feel nervous potentially, they'll be sort of panicked about it, and they'll really struggle in the situation to maybe make better choices. They won't really be sure what to do, and they might just give up and they might just say, oh, fuck it, like I just, this is too much, this is overwhelming. Then the actual eating might actually get away from them, which can trigger those feelings of shame, like I mentioned earlier. So I like for people to think ahead, visualize, okay, what would a really good effort at one of these events look like for me, okay? So it could be to do with the food choices that you make. It could be doing things like, honoring your fullness levels when you're eating, or it could be something like, okay, I'm going to, have my, main meal, but then I'm going to have like no dessert or something like that. You know, there's a lot of ways you can go about this, and this will be different from person to person, but the point here is going in with some sort of plan in mind of how you want this to go. And what I want to make really clear here is that you have to be realistic about these plans that you're making, okay? Because if I ask someone to go through this exercise with me and they say to me, okay, Brian, perfect would look like I'm going to this barbecue, I'm going to prepare all my own food, I'm going to bring that with me, I'm not going to touch anything that's there. You could do that, but I don't think that's necessary. For the vast majority of people, like unless you are potentially a physique competitor and you're like close to a competition, or you're some sort of competitive athlete where it warrants that you are this tight and rigid and strict with your nutrition, for most people it's not necessary to be that restrictive about it. And similarly, if we haven't done the planning for an event like this, but the client goes to it anyway, we can do sort of a review of how that actually went. So for example, you could go on a stag weekend, okay, and we'll discuss that, we'll discuss how it went in terms of food and potentially alcohol consumption. And I can say to you, okay, well, if this was gonna happen again next week, what would you do differently, if anything? And that can give you a lot of good guidelines in terms of, all right, I know I went to that stag last weekend, didn't really go the way I planned it to, or I wasn't really happy with it in retrospect, so I know for next time I'll make certain adjustments to what I'm doing with my nutrition, what I'm doing with my alcohol consumption, and therefore I can make better choices next time. So you learn from each experience, right? And that's important because in a lot of cases people will, you know, if it doesn't go the way they had planned, they will just try and forget about it, kind of stick their head in the sand. They don't want to review it because they feel potentially ashamed of how it went, which I discussed already is part of a problem here. And they don't actually learn anything from it, so next time it comes around, they potentially just make all the same mistakes again, which is a big waste because we can learn a lot from the mistakes that we make. So then another thing we can look at is how can we actually manage energy intake overall? Because that is part of the main concern here, like I said. People over-consuming calories at events like these, potentially derailing them from their goals. So we can do things like calorie budgeting, for example, which is where, you know, if you have an event coming up that you're aware of and you have advance notice, let's say you have a wedding or something to go to on a Saturday, you know, you can do a bit of calorie budgeting. You know, if you're tracking your calories, and if not, we can look at portion control. But say if you're tracking your calories, you can shave off, say, 100, 200, 300 calories per day leading up to that in the week, for example. So, you know, if the wedding's on Saturday and you shave off 200 calories a day, Monday to Friday, you know, that's 1,000 calories extra that you have spare for the week. And as we know, as we talk about all the time, average calories are what drives overall changes in body composition, right? Whether you're in a surplus, whether you're at maintenance, whether you're in a fat loss phase or in a deficit, you know, if the average calories at the end of the week are where you need them to be, in most cases, with, you know, there is some nuance to this, but in most cases, you will get the results that you want. So you can do sort of that sort of calorie banking, you can do that sort of calorie budgeting, that can work quite well. Now there are limitations to this, of course. I wouldn't want people trying to conserve, you know, excessive amounts of calories to then save up for a massive blowout over a weekend, right? It's not really a healthy or sustainable dietary practice to have, right? It really just looks like kind of restrict binge behavior, which we absolutely do not want to support. So generally I suggest to people that they don't try and bank more than, say, 10% of their calories per day leading up to an event like that. And as I alluded to earlier, you can also manage your portions overall. So maybe you're not tracking your food, but you can try and reduce the portions of, say, the carbohydrates in the meals across the week or the fats in meals across the week, and that will allow for this kind of budgeting that I'm talking about. A lot of people will find it useful to use intermittent fasting on the day of an event, as this allows them to save some calories for later in the day. So for example, if you're going out in the evening time to this event and you know there's going to be, you know, more calories consumed at it, or it's more likely that there will be, you know, potentially you skip breakfast, you have lunch and maybe a snack before you go to the event, and therefore you've saved quite a lot of calories or energy to then go towards that event. And you know, that's something you can use in conjunction with something like the calorie banking or the calorie budgeting. And again, there are limitations to this. I wouldn't really want people trying to fast all day before going out for a meal, because really it just increases the likelihood that you'll end up overeating at the meal because you're so hungry. So I would prefer to see people still eating some nice, wholesome, nutritious meals in the build-up to whatever the event is on the day. We want people to make, quite filling choices in those cases. So a lot of emphasis on high protein foods, a lot of emphasis on plant foods like fruits and vegetables. They're going to be quite filling, quite low in calories, quite nutrient dense. So they're the best things to be structuring your diet around if you're trying to save some degree of, carbohydrates or fats for the energy that they provide for the event later on. And another thing we can do is actually try and build this into the plan, actually try and facilitate events at the weekends, or just being able to go out for meals, or being able to go out and get a takeaway, things like that. That's something that we can actually plan for our clients. And it just comes back to how you set up someone's energy intake across the week and those targets. So for example, if somebody is eating on average 2,000 calories a day for their goals, well, that 2,000 calories per day is actually the same as 1,800 calories for 5 days of the week, and then 2,500 calories for 2 days of the weekend. So that actually works out just the exact same. And that's essentially what you're going to see when someone is trying to do that calorie banking approach. But this is just something that we might set up well in advance, say, okay, look, based on your lifestyle, based on what you want to do here with your goals, this could be the right setup for you. And a lot of people really find it easier to stay on track and stick to what their targets are when they have it set up like that. Now, there are some disadvantages to that, of course, because if you're someone who really cares about their training performance and getting a lot of training output, or you're an athlete, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense to squeeze a large degree of your calorie intake into something like the weekend, because you're going to be somewhat under-fueled the rest of the week, which is not going to be good for training sessions during that time. Similar to that 5-day, 2-day approach, you can also have a 6-day, 1-day approach, for example. So to use the same example that I used earlier, if the average goal is 2,000 calories per day and you do 6 days at 1,800 calories, well, that gives you 3,200 calories to actually play with for 1 day of the week. So that can be another way to go about this. And again, there are some limitations to this, and we have to look exactly how this is structured, because, if 2,000 calories a day is your goal and you try and eat nothing on one day, just so you can eat 4,000 calories the next day, and then it averages out at 2,000 calories, that's obviously not good dietary practices. That is just super restrictive behavior, potentially in conjunction with just intentional overeating or binge eating. We don't want that. Don't get into that. It has to be properly set up. It has to be within reason, and there are some limitations on it, but it definitely can work if it's structured properly. And I think overall and broadly, we need to consider, is this actually going to throw you off if you go to an event like this? Because that's something that people might run into when they might have an unplanned event in this case. I've talked a lot about pre-planned events that you have notice for, but let's say you do go out for dinner on an evening and you weren't planning on it, but you got the invitation, you wanted to go, okay? If you consume more calories on that day of the week, does it actually have a massive impact on your overall week, which is really what's important? And I could argue multiple weeks are what's important. You can keep extending these timelines longer and longer and longer, because basically, when it comes to diet and nutrition, it's what you're doing most of the time for the long term that actually matters. So is going out for one meal, even if it was unplanned, is that going to throw you off massively? Not really. We'll see how it ends up at the end of the week. Do you end up at maintenance calories? Do you end up just in a small deficit where you might not see much fat loss, but you're still in a deficit? That's often what happens, to be honest. But it's very unlikely that's actually going to just throw everything off for you. And what we often find is it's about how people respond to situations like that. Because if you go in and you have the meal and maybe you start to panic and you get into this sort of all or nothing thinking, and you're saying, well, fuck it, I've screwed up now, I shouldn't be out at this meal, I'll just have whatever. Yeah, that will potentially lead to worse outcomes for you, worse behaviors overall. That might actually bleed into the following days, which you don't want, of course. And it's all just because of how you responded to that based on what you believed to be true about it, in that it was just completely derailing you. But the reality is it's not. We'll have to see how it fits in with the rest of the week. If you're tracking body weight and you experience a spike in body weight as a result of this, you may again think, oh crap, I've ruined everything. Why did I do that? I'm such an idiot, etc., etc. Continuing with the negative self-talk, when reality is we have to see what that looks like on average across the course of the week. Weight spikes for a lot of different reasons, and it's rarely a case that it's because you ate too much and gained a load of body fat. Very, 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 very rarely is that the reality. And honestly, it takes a lot of overeating to gain a significant amount of body fat in a short space of time. It doesn't take a lot of overeating to gain significant amounts of body fat over a long period of time. So I'll assume that you have some degree of knowledge going in, especially if you're a coaching client, of course. And if not, then that's something you're developing, okay? If you go to something like, say, a barbecue that's unplanned and you're showing up, you have choices that you can make in that situation. So take a breath, relax, think about, okay, what choices are gonna be better for me here? If there's offerings like hot dogs and sausages, etc., right there, very high fat, quite high calories, versus things like maybe chicken or turkey burgers. So you can say, oh, I know those are the lower fat options, therefore they're lower on calories, still a good source of protein, it's gonna be nice and filling. Maybe I have something like a turkey burger in a bun, maybe I get some salad, vegetables, things like that. So you just stop for a moment and actually think, okay, I'm in this situation, maybe it wasn't planned that I was gonna be here, but let's consider how I can actually do the best that I can in this situation based on what I've got to work with. And if you can do that most of the time, it is very unlikely that you're going to fail when it comes to managing your nutrition. You can also think about what trade-offs you're willing to make in these situations, depending what your goals are. So you may say, okay, well, I'm going to keep it to 2 drinks, not have any more than that, or I'm going to have a nice big main meal, and then I'm gonna check with myself later on if I want dessert, and if I'm not that hungry, maybe I'll just leave it, okay? So you always have a lot of choices that you can make, and if you just don't panic, don't fall into this all or nothing thinking you've ruined everything by going to this event, you'll probably make better choices and you end up better off. And something that I coach a lot of people on is to implement a slow and mindful eating approach to meals in these situations, especially meals out, especially meals that you haven't prepared yourself. Such a good place to implement slow and mindful eating because you can take your time with it, you can check in with yourself, see how full you're feeling across the meal, and it takes the sort of anxiety away from this. So you just relax and say, okay, look, I may not have planned to be here, but I'm here now, I'm gonna try and make good choices, I'm gonna eat slowly, I'm gonna enjoy the food, and just not getting yourself into that panicked and anxious state about the food decisions will actually facilitate you making better food decisions. If you're watching this and you really like the content, but it's something that you definitely resonate with, that you definitely struggle with, as it is for a lot of our clients, then consider how we might be able to help you on a one-to-one basis through our online coaching services. They will be completely tailored to you, and we can look at the exact situations you're coming up against and see how we can actually figure out how to solve those for you, help you manage your nutrition long-term overall.